We've got to talk about a bunch of major developments in the redistricting arms race that was set off by the Supreme Court last month. Because as you know, the Supreme Court gutted the remainder of the Voting Rights Act, made it much easier for red states to eliminate congressional districts where minorities make up a majority of the population. And it set off this insane, chaotic scramble in southern state legislatures to quickly pass new maps gerrymandered to benefit Republicans. And while a number of states have already succeeded, the effort in South Carolina was effectively shut down yesterday, at least for now. Because last week, after facing pressure from Donald Trump, the South Carolina House passed a new map that would eliminate the only majority black seat in the state, which is then especially wild because nearly a quarter of the population of that state is black. But then yesterday, the Senate defied Trump and adjourned without taking up the map. Though I will say, before you say, hey, attaboy, you give them a pat on the back, you should know that they didn't reject the map because it diluted black votes. It was that they shut it down because in-person early voting for the state's June 9th primary officially kicked off yesterday. So if they passed that new map, they'd need to set entirely new elections and cancel the votes of tens of thousands of people who had already cast their ballots. And according to reports, nearly 45,000 votes had already been cast by 3 p.m. yesterday. So understand, it's basically guaranteed that Republicans are going to try to pass another map after the midterms. And in fact, you had South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster basically saying the quiet part out loud on Twitter, writing, President Trump needs a Republican Congress to continue pursuing conservative policies that make our nation stronger. And adding, I am confident that one day South Carolina's congressional delegation will be completely Republican, while adding that he was disappointed that day has not yet come. But with all that, it'll be interesting if the Republicans there are spared from Trump. Because remember, after 7 Republican state senators in Indiana refused his redistricting push, Trump exacted his revenge by targeting them and backing MAGA-aligned primary opponents who successfully ousted 5 of them earlier this month. So it is very possible that we see the same thing happen in South Carolina Senate, where all members are up for election in 2028. But also, South Carolina wasn't the only state where Republicans faced a major setback yesterday. You also had a federal court striking down a gerrymandered map in Alabama that had been at the center of a lengthy and complicated legal battle for years now. Because back in 2023, a Supreme Court blocked a Republican-drawn congressional map that only included one majority black district, despite the fact that nearly a third of the state is black. But then the Republicans in the Alabama state legislature actively defied the Supreme Court and drew another map that only included one majority black district instead of 2. And so a federal court shot down the second version and ordered a special master to draw maps for 2024, which took effect after the Supreme Court declined to pause the lower court's order. But then after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, you had Alabama again asking the justices to let them use the second map. And this time, the justices cleared a path by sending the case back to the federal court. But yesterday, that federal panel, which notably included 2 Trump-appointed judges, struck down the map again, with the judges ruling that the map intentionally discriminated based on race in violation of the Constitution. And that ruling is actually incredibly significant because it's likely going to be at the center of other challenges to the new wave of gerrymandered maps nationwide. Because for nearly 4 decades, courts could use the Voting Rights Act to strike down maps that weaken minority voting power. And that was even when they didn't have proof that the maps were intentionally drawn to be discriminatory. But in that decision last month, the Supreme Court ruled that challengers now need to show the state intentionally drew district lines to discriminate against minority voters. It's a much higher bar. But again, it's not over. You had Alabama's Republican AG immediately saying he would appeal the decision to the Supreme Court, and if it agrees to take the case, it will be the first major test of their new standard. And that's really going to matter because over in Florida, we saw a court ruling going the exact opposite way. Right? Florida was one of the first states to impose new maps after the Supreme Court ruling, with Governor Ron DeSantis signing a version that could give Republicans as many as 4 more seats, with voting and civil rights groups challenging the map on a different front, arguing that it violated a state ban on partisan gerrymandering that was approved by nearly 63% of Florida voters in 2010. But yesterday, a DeSantis-appointed judge refused to block the maps from taking effect, ruling that the groups had failed to prove that their case would succeed because they didn't have direct evidence of illegal intent. And so the maps, they're going to stay in place while the case plays out, and it's expected to go all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court, with 6 of the 7 justices there also being appointed by DeSantis. So the chances of it getting struck down, not great. But of course, anything can happen, and both good and bad.